Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, please gather around and we'll have something special for you. I want to introduce the one, the only, Nicola Scott.
Hi, everybody.
Say hello, everybody.
Woo!
And Nicola, you are known for drawing one character in particular. At least it's your favorite character, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yes.
So today you're going to be doing a mirror sketch, I assume.
No.
I think everyone knows that.
I was thinking about it, but then I was like, oh, I'm just wasting
Wonder Woman
everybody's
would be
time,
that
right?
character, if I'm not mistaken.
Wonder Woman is the reason why I decided to draw comics in the first place. Because Linda Carter was my first superhero. She was my first exposure to superheroes. And there was no going back for me. And when I was in my mid-20s and trying to work out what the hell I was going to do with the rest of my life, I just thought to myself, gosh, I wish I could just draw Wonder Woman, because I do draw Wonder Woman when I'm sitting on the phone and scribbling away. And straight away it was like, oh my God, that's a real job that someone has right now in an industry that's full of superheroes. Oh my God, I love superheroes. I'm going to do that. And I didn't know anything about comics at the time. There isn't the same comics culture in Australia, certainly not in the 70s as there was here. Even though there were some comics available, it was not the same. And I didn't find an entry point for me when I was young. So my entry point to superheroes was film and TV. So it wasn't really until I decided I was going to do this for a living that I started reading comics.
Well, you mentioned that there wasn't as much of an outlet growing up in Australia, but how early did you get into drawing? Because if I'm not mistaken, you kind of got into it in an interesting way with your mom.
Yeah, so I started drawing really young because my mother is an artist, or was an artist, and my grandmother was an artist, and so the culture of art was very dominant in my family growing up. So we were all sort of given, my sisters and I and my cousins, we were all given sort of art materials to play with and encouraged and sort of, taught how to use them. I think it just sort of took a little bit more with me than it did with my sisters, even though they're both artistic in different ways. For me, it kind of took, and I'm the youngest by quite a distance, and that meant that when I was little and my mum would go off to do life drawing classes, this is in the 70s, instead of leaving me with my sisters to babysit me, she'd take me with her. And I would just sit in on life drawing classes when I was 4. And
Totally normal.
Yeah,
totally normal.
So, I started by sort of taking her quick sketches of these sort of beautiful fleshy women, and I'd start putting Wonder Woman boots on them and giving them lots of hair, and it was all very messy, like a 4-year-old draws. But it got me sort of used to being in that kind of environment, and slowly but surely my mum would sort of teach me how to look at the model and draw what I saw, and eventually she'd just give me my own paper and my own charcoals and just say, draw the model. And which I started doing, and so I sort of got very used to drawing anatomy and looking at it and how it worked, and sort of balance and body language really young. But I hadn't really thought that I would make a career out of being an artist, because I had decided when I was young that I was going to be an actor. And so I was studying acting. And when that career didn't go anywhere,
at least not
I was
yet.
left trying to work out what else I was going to do. And the one thing that I knew I could do was draw, and it was like, what am I going to do with that to make a living? And I spent quite a long time before I came to the realization that, oh my God, I could get paid to draw my favorite thing in the world if I get into this American industry of which I know nothing. And so that was the beginning for me.
So I want to ask you about your process.
Yeah.
So I've noticed you sort of you're starting with the face here, but you in particular have an interesting process when it comes to how you lay out your drawings, correct?
Yeah, when I'm sort of doing a page of art, I tend to, like everybody does, I tend to do my thumbnails in the margin of the script so that I've got them all together. But when I get out my sort of artboards to start on the finished thing, they look, if you can see the blue line stuff on here, the sort of breakdown and the grid, they look just like this, except they're, you know, quite a bit bigger. And with a blue pencil, if I'm just penciling, with a blue pencil, I'll do like a really rough breakdown of my thumbnail, just enough to give me the sense of the composition. But then I turn on my light box and I flip it over, which is blank. It doesn't look like that, it just looks like a blank piece of paper. I turn on my light box and then I do all of my roughs on the back of the page. So it's backwards in its storytelling.
Right.
But I've already sort of worked out my storytelling in the thumbnail. But the detailing and getting my anatomy right and getting my storytelling right and getting my facial expressions right, all of that I do on the back of the page, because doing roughs, I want it to be kind of loose and organic. I want to get as much sort of natural dynamic shape in there as possible. I don't want anyone looking stiff, and so you draw really loosely and then you sort of refine and refine and refine and refine. And I just find if I do that on the front of the page, it makes for quite a messy finish pencil, quite a rough finish pencil. And I like my pencils to be really tight, really clean, so that once I've done all of my roughs, they don't have loads of detail on there. They've got structure, they've got body language. I get my faces and my hands right, and you know, they're usually covered in perspective lines. Then I flip it over, apart from like to the, you know, the clean side, and apart from like a few very faint guidelines, I've got nothing there. I've got a really clean surface, and I can then draw the finished pencils really fast, which gives them some energy, but really detailed and really clean without doing too much rubbing out. And if I'm inking my own work, I'll just go straight to inking. I don't bother doing finished pencils unless there's a particular facial expression that I'm still playing with. You know, the reason why I started sort of flipping over was because when you flip over an image and it's suddenly facing the opposite way, it's a immediate way to give yourself a fresh perspective, a fresh eye. Where, you know, usually you need to sort of walk away and come back to it and look at it afresh to see what the mistakes are. If you just flip it over on a light box, you see where the mistakes are immediately, or you see where it's not quite conveying the information that you want to convey as effectively. And I find that with a lot of really subtle facial expressions, I try to keep them not too cartoony, even though I love that style. It's just not a style that I've developed. So there's a subtlety to my emotions, which means that I need to really get them right, because otherwise they'll be misinterpreted.
Well, you mentioned sort of figuring out the different facial expressions, and you mentioned your acting background.
Yeah.
I had heard that you kind of use that training maybe a little bit to figure out how you're going to do certain scenes and things like that.
Theatre training has done so much for my comic book storytelling, because I know how to block a scene. I know where all of my characters are in any given space. You know, I'm very sort of three-dimensionally aware. Whether it's in a room or an open space, I've got a really good idea of how to keep the consistent scale. And I know where everybody is, and you know, as soon as you've got multiple people in a room, the storytelling of making sure that you're not jumping camera shots too often, because it becomes quite confusing. Keeping a firm idea of where people are, and then sort of finding the best way to keep it visually interesting, as well as not confusing, keeping everybody in the right place and in the right order along the length of the panel. That in itself came from blocking theatre, doing theatre blocking. And when I'm drawing costumes, I used to make costumes because I can sew. I used to make a lot of costumes, so I know how clothes are constructed.
Right.
And whenever I'm sort of going through a script, I've read it a couple of times before I sit down to thumbnail. And even then, I will act out all the parts. So I'll
That's what I was
approach it
asking
like
about.
an actor. So yeah, I will play the part of, you know, Wonder Woman, and then I'll play the part of Steve, and I'll try to find the nuance in a scene, because sometimes there is power and subtlety that I find can be really affecting. There was a scene, I use it as an example quite a bit. There was a scene in the first issue of Teen Titans that I drew when I was working with JT Kroll on Teen Titans, where Cassie and Connor, who had been boyfriend and girlfriend for a while, she was breaking up with him. And Cassie had kind of gone through a period of time of fans getting frustrated with her, and I loved the character and I wanted people to love her again, and I thought, oh my god, and the first thing she's doing is breaking up with her boyfriend, and everybody loves Connor, and this is going to really break some hearts. And it was kind of an argument that they were having, and it would have been very easy for an artist to just sort of think that they were shouting and just draw a lot of shouty faces, and Cassie just would not have come out of that sympathetically. And so I sort of floated the idea, having acted it out a couple of times, I floated the idea to JT and to our editor, what if I made it like a really quiet, subtle scene where they're sitting in the room and they're sitting on the edge of the bed and they're holding hands, and it's an emotional conversation where we can feel sympathy for both of the characters, because that would be better for me as a female creator looking after my female characters. And they were both like, that's a great idea, do that. So that's where sort of the acting these scenes out gives me sort of the different ways that you can play a scene, especially emotionally charged one.
So you only have about 5 minutes left, and I noticed that
I've done it again.
I noticed that you left the hair to the end. And I've been told that you sometimes spend a lot of time on this particular aspect of a drawing.
If I am not under a time constraint, and sometimes even when I am, I can get really lost in the hair, because it becomes quite sort of, it's like a meditation. You can just sort of keep going. There have been times, I think the most full on was when I was doing a Blackest Night tie-in. It was the first time I worked on Wonder Woman with Greg Rucka. It was the Blackest Night Wonder Woman 3-issue arc. And at the time, my family was going through a big thing. My mum was really sick. And so I didn't have a lot of time, but I really wanted to make this series as good as it could be, because it was me finally getting to draw Wonder Woman. I was getting to work with Greg on Wonder Woman. And so it was a really big deal to me. And I find that when I'm super stressed and super busy, you get into like a slipstream of creativity and
kind of in the zone.
Yeah, it's like I find I produce my best stuff when I have no time to think about anything. But I would fall into spaces where I would just start drawing curls and curls and curls of waving in the wind hair, that I would snap out of it and go, oh my God, she's like Rapunzel all of a sudden. There'd be like hair for the whole page, and I'd have to kind of rub it out and sort of try and contain her crazy Medusa hair. But yes, I find hair is one of those things that I can get very, very carried away with. But when I'm doing quick sketches, it's usually the first thing that goes out the window. It becomes real messy really quickly.
So you mentioned you work with Greg Rucka
on
Wonder Woman. But you're not just working with just Greg when you work on this. Do you have a whole team of editorial staff and people like that you work with on these projects? What's it like to work with those people? What's it like to work as that sort of cohesive unit?
We were, for Wonder Woman Rebirth, we were so lucky that we just, from the get-go, felt like a really cohesive team. Liam Sharp, who was doing the alternate issues, he was doing the present-day Wonder Woman story. He'd been attached to the book for months and was kind of waiting for us to get started. And Greg and I came on at kind of the 11th hour. And It was only because Greg and I have known each other for such a long time, and Diana is kind of our favorite character, and we've talked about her a lot for about a decade, so that even though we just suddenly got the book, we already knew that we were going to be on the same page, even though, you know, there are a couple of things that he put in for me, like I'm a fan of the invisible jet, even though I know it's a bit ridiculous. And, you know, when he said to me, what do you want in the story? And I was like, I know you're going to kill me, but I really want the invisible jet. And he was like, oh, Jesus, Nicola, explain it to me. Explain how that is not going to be ridiculous. And I explained to him exactly what it is, where it came from, how it is to be, and what its use is, because we need it in the story. And he was like, yeah, all right, you got me. All right, I'll write that in. And so, you know, we had a lot of fun. But the editorial group as well, it was one of those experiences where we were all just wanting... We were all on the same page in terms of tonally what we wanted to hit, what marks we wanted to hit, what story beats we wanted to hit. And... You know, we had quite the team at the time. I think most of my sort of contact was with Tay, with Rebecca Taylor, and it was a joy. It was one of the most collaborative experiences, because to start off with, Liam and Greg and I got on Skype a number of times, and we just blocked out the idea of both stories and a lot of sort of design concept stuff, because we were all working from the same pool, and we all got to sort of contribute interesting ideas. It was just one of the most collaborative experiences I've ever had in sort of mainstream comics. And again, we didn't have a lot of time to prep, because we were announcing, I think, about 7 days after Greg and I were attached to the book. And just that sort of time pressure just made us concentrate and get right in there and have a lot of fun.
So, my last question to you would be, Wonder Woman 84 coming out next year.
So excited.
So I've heard. What is the one thing that you would love to see, that you'd be so excited was in there?
I have full faith in Patty Jenkins, because every decision that she's made and every creative idea that's made its way into the film, I've felt incredibly in line with. You know, Liam and I met her and Gal a couple of years ago at San Diego when we did the Wonder Woman 75th anniversary panel. And it was the first time that we were getting insight into what she was doing with the movie, and we were already working on the series. And what amazed me was how much sort of we were on the same page. And it was like, even though we're dealing with the same character, the character hasn't been the version that she's doing and the version that we're doing for a while, but there we were both doing the same version. We both saw Steve the same way. So that was incredibly reassuring, and I feel very reassured from what I've seen so far of the new one. I love that she's kind of got rid of the strap and that the lasso is attached to the belt. I love that she's got a little more 80s height in her hair. I love it. You know, she's got a touch of glamour, which, you know, to me, Wonder Woman has always had. But I think, as a fan, what I would love to see, I really want to see Gal Gadot spin into that outfit. I really want to see a modern version of the spin, because it's so iconic.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that. And I felt like it could have even existed at the very end of the first movie, when she's back in the Louvre and she hears the sirens. I feel like she could have gone out on that rooftop and spun and then jumped into the air, and the whole audience would have exploded in their seats, you know.
Right,
so
I'm getting the cut signal over there, but basically
what we're going to
do is Nicola's going to finish up this drawing, but we're going to give it away to someone
Wonder
sitting here.
Woman's a blonde. Sorry.
So I have a trivia question. If you've been paying attention, can you please tell me who was the other artist on her run with Greg Rucka on the Wonder Woman?
Woo!
Liam Sharp. Thank you so much.
She needs some more
Ladies and
mascara.
gentlemen, can we give it up for Nicola Scott, please?
Thank you, everyone. Who's this for?